Okay, let's dive into something that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a movie. But this isn't fiction. It's a story that really pushes the boundaries of global power. I mean, what happens when one country's police action is what another country calls an act of war? Let's get into it.
So picture this. It's January 3rd, 2026. You're in Caracas, Venezuela, and suddenly, nothing. Not a loud bang, but this really creepy silence. The whole capital city just goes dark. A massive cyber attack. And you have to understand, this isn't just some power outage. No, this is the first move, the opening shot in an operation that is about to send shockwaves around the entire planet.
So in the middle of all that chaos, while the city's completely dark, the U.S. kicks off Operation Absolute Resolve. And if you're thinking this was some kind of quiet, sneaky special ops mission, think again. This was a full-on assault. We're talking more than 150 aircraft simultaneously hitting military targets all across Caracas. Air bases, naval ports, the whole shebang.
And this whole operation, it boils down to two main targets: President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. U.S. Special Forces literally storm a military fort, grab them, and put them on a plane straight to New York. Now get this, they're not being treated as prisoners of war. Nope. They're being treated as criminal defendants, about to stand trial in a U.S. court on narco-terrorism charges. Just wild.
And let's be clear, this was not a clean operation by any stretch. Reports from Venezuelan officials say around 80 people were killed in the raid. So yeah, this was a violent, deadly incursion into another country's territory.
So as you can imagine, the world just kind of stopped and stared. Friends, foes, everyone was scrambling. And it all came down to one single, massive question. Was what the U.S. just did even legal?
All right, so to even begin to answer that, we've got to look at the global rulebook. We have to start with international law.
Okay, so the whole foundation of international law, it's built on this one huge concept: sovereignty. Think of it like this. Every country is the king of its own castle. It gets to make the rules inside its own borders. You can't just send your army next door to enforce your laws in their house. It's pretty much the most basic rule of the road for nations.
And this isn't some new idea. This rule has been the bedrock of how countries deal with each other since the end of World War II. It's written right there in the UN Charter. Article 2, Section 4. I mean, it's crystal clear. You shall not use force against another state's territory. Full stop. And there's a good reason for it, right? It was put there to stop the exact kind of thing that leads to massive global conflicts.
Now, like any rule, there are a couple of exceptions, but they are super, super narrow. First, the UN Security Council has to give you the green light. That did not happen here. The second is self-defense. But, and this is the important part, it has to be in response to an armed attack. And international law is really clear on this point. Drug trafficking, as bad as it is, doesn't count as an armed attack. It's just not the same thing.
So, if you ask the UN, or pretty much any international law expert, the answer is simple, and it's not good for the U.S. As one high-ranking official said, the UN Charter is not an optional document. From their point of view, this was a flagrant violation of international law. End of story. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly.
Because this is where the whole thing takes a massive turn. We leave the world of international law and we step into a completely different universe, a courtroom in the United States. And let me tell you, they play by a whole different set of rules.
This is where we run into a really interesting and kind of controversial piece of U.S. law called the Ker-Frisbie doctrine. It's been around for a long time, and the gist of it is this. The court doesn't really care how you got into the courtroom. You could have been brought in legally through extradition, or you could have been kidnapped and thrown in a van. As far as the trial is concerned, it just doesn't matter.
So what does that actually mean? It means U.S. courts basically build a wall. On one side is how the person was captured. On the other side is the trial itself. The court only cares about what happens on the trial side. So even if the capture of Maduro was totally illegal under international law, a U.S. judge can say, not my problem. Let's proceed with the trial.
And right there, you have this massive clash. It's like two worlds colliding. International law says the capture was illegal, full stop. But U.S. domestic law says, hey, the trial's perfectly fine. You have two totally separate legal systems looking at the exact same event and coming up with polar opposite answers. It's a real head-scratcher.
Believe it or not, we've actually seen something like this before. This isn't totally new territory. To really get where the U.S. is coming from, we need to rewind the clock to 1989, to the invasion of Panama and the capture of its leader, Manuel Noriega.
But, and this is a big but, the details are super important here. It's not a perfect one-to-one comparison. See, with Noriega, the U.S. had already said he wasn't the legitimate leader of Panama. With Maduro, the U.S. had officially recognized him as president for years. Plus, the whole Panama invasion kicked off after Panama declared a state of war and a U.S. Marine was killed. In this case with Venezuela, there was no trigger like that at all.
So you've got this clash of laws, you've got a historical example that doesn't quite line up, and what you're left with is a giant can of worms. I mean, think about it. If one powerful country decides it can just ignore the global rulebook whenever it wants, what's to stop everyone else from doing the exact same thing?
This is what the experts call the reciprocity problem, or, the what's good for the goose is good for the gander problem. The Cato Institute framed the question perfectly. If the U.S. can just go grab a foreign leader because of a U.S. indictment, what's to stop China from doing the same to an American official they accuse of breaking Chinese law? It's a chilling question, and it pretty much throws the entire idea of diplomatic safety out the window.
The potential fallout here is huge. This isn't just about bending the rules against aggression. It basically creates a global target list. Any world leader who gets indicted by a prosecutor in the U.S. could suddenly find themselves in the crosshairs of a military operation. The power to decide who to attack shifts from something like the UN to a local U.S. attorney's office. That's a massive change.
So, at the end of the day, this whole situation with Nicolás Maduro forces us to ask a really fundamental question about the world we live in. Are we governed by a shared set of rules that, apply to everybody, big and small? Or is it just about power, where the strongest countries get to do whatever they want? This operation, it didn't just put a president on trial. In a way, it put the entire idea of international law on trial. And honestly, the jury is still out on that one.